Good morning, Professor. Welcome to Silver Stream. I'm so very glad that you agreed to find time and then you've arrived here in Kathmandu for our graduation ceremony and our 25th year ceremony as well. And especially thank you, a lot of thanks from our team for agreeing to do this podcast in such a short notice. Welcome to Silver Mountain. Welcome to Kathmandu.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind, and it's absolutely delightful to be back here again for my kind of fourth or fifth visit to Silver Mountain.
Right.
Having been here, in many ways from the very start of the program, but I'm sure we'll come to that.
Surely. There are many things that I would want to explore today. I'm also thinking about, would I have this opportunity again? But definitely, one side also says that since this is your fourth time, it will definitely be a fifth time and a sixth time again. So I'm trying to choose between the topics that we're going to go through and the questions as well. But we'd like to start with a simple warm-up first. We are running an international degree here in Nepal. Silver Mountain has been here for 25 years. And Queen Margaret University, Edinburgh, has a strong history of 150 years. So we are trying to explore a lot about international degrees and international education as well for many of our young viewers who would like that to be explored properly and answered. But somewhere down the line, we see a connection that me and maybe you, Professor, and almost everybody is nowadays having an international experience as well. In my research, I was fortunate enough to find out that you had studied at the UC Berkeley for quite a while as an exchange student. If I may, I would like to start with your experience as an exchange student and an international student. What would you say did the experience give you that you might have not found back home, maybe in class? So could you please share a little bit on that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So as you say, this was my third year of my undergraduate degree. I was lucky enough to spend a year studying at Berkeley, so just across the bay from San Francisco. Obviously, fantastic location, fantastic food. I think San Francisco has enough restaurants that everyone in the city could eat out in one evening.
Right.
That wasn't why I went there, obviously. But what I learned, I think there were really sort of two things. What it gave me, and I think this is what any form of international higher education gives people, is a level of confidence that you wouldn't, and a level of confidence to kind of operate sort of beyond your kind of local context, if you like, that you wouldn't necessarily get if you just sort of studied in one place or studied on a degree that was sort of, just from one particular institution. So kind of confidence was a kind of a huge part of it, just being sort of dropped in clearly not a completely alien culture, shared language, many shared sort of, kind of much shared around the kind of the culture, but nonetheless, I'd moved from a kind of university which maybe had about sort of, kind of 3,000 students at that point. It's a larger university now, to one with tens of thousands in a kind of, great cosmopolitan city. So that was a big change. But the second thing I learned, and I think for me, the real lesson I would want sort of other students to get is what I did, perhaps not always deliberately, but I did it nonetheless, was to really throw myself into as many opportunities as presented themselves. So I worked at the bar. So as a student, an overseas student, you can only work for the university if you go to the US. But that meant I could work in their international bar. Great views of the kind of Golden Gate Bridge, because it's sort of up on the hill above Berkeley. That really, I'd already worked in a couple of bars prior to that, so that's kind of that's pretty much my some exposure to hospitality as a student. This sort of bar work to help pay my way through university. But I also did some sort of an internship at the San Francisco Cinematheque, which is kind of sort of avant-garde film distributor and exhibitor. I worked for the Pacific Film Archive in Berkeley, and worked as a projectionist for the university. So I think what I learned was that if you really if an opportunity presents itself, sees it with both hands.
Right.
And I probably didn't know then just how valuable that was going to be.
Right, like we all are naive at times.
Yes. I mean, and they were really enjoyable experiences.
Right.
You'll see they were kind of very much, apart from the bar work, kind of, rooted around film, which was what I was studying. So that made a lot of sense. But it then meant I could then apply that when I came back to the UK. I had a kind of an area of knowledge that other people on the degree didn't have, a familiarity with areas of film that they were less familiar with. But that, not just avant-garde film, but also kind of archival film work and film, the kind of, sort of film distribution. But it also meant in terms of my CV, when I was applying for kind of, PhD, and when I was subsequently applying for jobs, there was something on my CV, so, okay, you had this international experience. What did you do with it? And I was able to say, well, I did these various things. So for me, that's a real lesson that kind of international opportunity can offer. But the first one, as I say, is really the kind of confidence that comes with that international dimension. And we know from British Council research that if you look at kind of people in leadership roles across the globe, whether that's in politics or business or kind of all the third sector in charity work, they often have a disproportionate percentage of them. Their education had an international dimension to it. Either they studied abroad, they did an internship abroad, or they were studying on a degree which involved a combination of a sort of a home. The kind of the host country's qualifications with that of another country, as we have here with Silver Mountain and QMU.
Right. So, wow, such a great experience that you shared. Your answer takes me back to my international experience as well. When I first interned for the Ritz-Carlton back in Doha, I was pretty impressed to see. I was very surprised, firstly, and then impressed to see about 90 different countries. Their flags were painted in the entrance of the staff area as we walked through, and I was very glad to see my country's flag as well. And I feel that I wouldn't have been the person that I am today if I hadn't had that particular international exposure. Because, as you say, we do have unique selling points of ourselves and unique capabilities in technicality as well. But then, being in a diverse culture and maybe getting out a little bit of our comfort zone definitely gives you a lot of maybe confidence to probably present your skill properly. Definitely.
Yes, I think that's right. Firstly, that point about sort of stepping outside your comfort zone, and again, I think it's kind of sort of David Bowie who sort of talked about you want to kind of you want to sort of wade into the water to a point that's just out of your comfort zone,
right?
Just beyond which you're comfortable, and that's where you really learn.
Yes.
You really learn things. You can be creative because you're sort of exploring at the edge of the sort of the known, or that kind of that where the known and the unknown sort of meet. Is that sort of that point. I think that's what he was sort of referring to. And as you say, it's just beyond the comfort zone, and it's really there that rich experience lies. It builds your confidence, but it can also it develops your creativity. And then secondly, as you say, then I think this is the other thing that going to Berkeley gave me. It gave me far more exposure to students from other countries than I had studying where I was studying in Scotland. So kind of shared a dorm with a colleague from kind of South Korea. I then moved in with a kind of sort of Australian architect who was doing his kind of postgraduate degree. We kind of found an apartment to sort of to live in together. We had kind of sort of colleagues from all over the globe were studying, and we initially lived in what was called the International House, which is a mixture of kind of both US students and students from across the globe. Right. So I think that's absolutely critical, and in a career like hospitality, it's an international career.
Yes.
We have a strong relationship with Rocco Forte's Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh, very sort of famous hotel, sort of a famous landmark really in the centre of Edinburgh. The general managers there, they move around the globe. Right. They'll be in Edinburgh for a few years, but then they're in Canada, then they're in Dubai, etc., etc. So hospitality it's an international industry, and you can expect to work and you want to kind of you want to work in kind of across the globe. It brings you lots of different great experience. So that, again, having that international dimension to your education, can be a real eye opener.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor, for allowing me to explore that part as well. Well, I'm so much interested and curious about your previous experience so much. In my research tells me that your career spans from film to performance arts and now in university leadership as well. So I'd just like to put this in a fun way. Since you have experience behind the camera as well, if you were to sum up your career or experiences into one movie, what genre would it probably be?
Probably a screwball comedy. I don't know, in as much as, or a kind of, a sort of romantic comedy, but almost without the romance. Because what they both those genres have in common. I mean, so the romantic comedy, you have the kind of what they refer to as the meet cute, when the two, who as the audience, are going to be the ones who eventually fall in love. Usually one of them's got a wrong partner, but they have this, they meet in some, and it's called a meet cute because it's a kind of, there's something cute about,
Right.
the way in which they meet, something sort of surprising, unexpected, somewhat random. I think that might seem an odd way to describe a career where I've essentially kind of, came to Queen Margaret University as a PhD student and then kind of progressed to a lecturer, senior lecturer, head of department, dean of faculty, and then deputy principal. But I think at the same time, well, it's better than it being I couldn't describe it as a thriller, and it's certainly not a kind of a horror. But I think what I like about that genre as a way of sort of understanding is the mixture of the thing about the meet cute is it's it's not all within your control, and that's very true generally. We can there are things we have control over, but I suppose what I have learned is I have been very lucky. It's not, yes, I've worked hard. I kind of, sort of built up my kind of credentials and experience. That's all really important. But I also have to acknowledge the role of others and kind of other people, whether be it the wrong partner, whatever, in a romantic comedy is really important, or the best friend. But equally, there is an element of chance.
Right.
It was chance that I saw a kind of, a sort of leaflet pinned to the department notice board when I was finishing my degree at Stirling, advertising a paid PhD studentship, studying documentary film, and that I applied for it. And there have been other elements of sort of chance along the way. So I think, yeah, if I was to, given the various, certainly not kind of, I would have liked to have been able to say, well, obviously kind of, a Marvel kind of, sort of studio sort of, production,
Right.
or some sort of action hero. But no, I suspect kind of, sort of a screwball comedy or romantic comedy is
Right.
probably.
And I'm sure that it would have been a great hit, great success, but given the stories and all the experiences that you would probably represent in the movie as well.
Well, I think too, the other thing I've sort of learned is the importance of not taking yourself too seriously. And that probably becomes even more important the further you get into sort of, to management. You've got to retain that light side. That's really important. It keeps you human. And if you think of the classic sort of screwball comedies, like kind of, sort of Bringing Up Baby, or even the kind of, sort of more recent ones, they have that. There's a lightness to them.
Right.
That I think is very compelling. And in today's world, kind of international conflict, sort of, kind of economic sort of disparities, kind of climate crisis, et cetera, you need to find the light steps in life as well. And I guess the other thing about romantic comedies and screwball comedies, they are about human connection. They're about human relationships, and just as hospitality and culinary arts are.
Right. Very true, Professor. Speaking about memories and beautiful sceneries, I can't help but think about Queen Margaret in Edinburgh and the Edinburgh city as well. I'm sure it's very beautiful, and many of us have got the opportunity to come over to QMU and then have a view of the city and experience the Edinburgh life as well. But for many of our young viewers who are currently enrolled at Silver Mountain with QMU and also aspiring hoteliers around here, if you were to share something about Edinburgh, and to make this a little bit difficult, or let's say fun maybe, could you kindly share one thing that keeps Edinburgh very special, but yet something that we would not find in the normal guidebooks?
Yes, I mean, well, you would probably find it, but I think it's maybe not the way in which it would. You would find these things, but it's maybe not the way in which, if you went looking for them, they would sort of describe it. So one of the things about Edinburgh that makes it distinct makes it sort of visually distinct, and in a way has kind of protected its development, is that it's built on two extinct volcanoes. So the two most iconic, in many ways, two of the most iconic aspects of the Edinburgh skyline are the castle up on Castle Rock, and which is a volcanic plug, and then Arthur's Seat, which is kind of sort of extinct volcano. Arthur's Seat, which is a number one on TripAdvisor for kind of things to do in Edinburgh, because an extinct volcano is never, can never disappoint in many ways, and you get fantastic views of the city. But what it's meant is you've got these, as well as the fact that you've got the kind of the River Forth running around it, it's meant that the development of the city has not got to the point where you can't, the old parts of the city are always still visible because of its geographical formation. In a way, it's no accident it's sometimes referred to as the Athens of the North, because kind of Athens is a bit like that as well, in terms of you've got the Parthenon and the Acropolis, and nothing is allowed to be built sort of, above that height. So I think part of its distinctiveness comes from the fact that it wears its history very visibly. And it partly has been able to do that because you could only do so much in terms of development when you've got these two sort of kind of prominent quite steep sort of hills that when it was originally settled, they sort of settled on and built their settlements on. And choosing between the two, they eventually chose sort of kind of Castle Rock, where the castle is. So I think that's the idea of a kind of city built on kind of sort of two extinct volcanoes, but the way in which that has then preserved the kind of the picturesque nature of the city. I guess that would be one.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Professor. So now that we know Edinburgh, I'd like to have my viewers understand more about QMU as well. So QMU runs partners across the globe in Egypt, Nepal, Hong Kong as well, Greece and Sri Lanka as well. So definitely there is a lot of scope, as we already explored, about the international degree. So, but Professor, what would you say does this global footprint actually mean for a student sitting in one of our classes here today?
I think, well, there are no, as you say, we've worked with international partners for over 25 years now, and with Silver Mountain since 2011. So we've got a long track record in supporting these sorts of this kind of international collaboration. We have about 7,000 students now studying. In fact, we have more students studying with our collaborative partners than we have studying on campus. So we've got a long history, which means in this area, which means we're very adept at ensuring that the kind of the quality of the degree is as it should be, but is also adapted to the local context. So that long history means we've got a lot of experience of working with international partners and ensuring that the degree that's offered to the students is one that makes sense for the students both where they are. So for students in Nepal that they're studying a kind of hospitality degree or a culinary arts degree that reflects both the local context while at the same time prepares them for a global profession. And it partly does that because UK degrees, UK, I guess, has been in the higher education industry literally for centuries. We've been in it as an institution, as you say, for 150 years. But a UK degree has a particular cachet globally. It's recognised globally. It offers an international standard of high quality education because of the way in which the quality assurance regime works in the UK, which essentially means that a degree here that we offer, with you and that you deliver here in Kathmandu, has to have the same quality standards, offer an equivalent student experience that our students studying in Edinburgh would get. So that's a really important part of the arrangement and of the relationship, that students studying here know that their degree has the same quality, the same standing, the same value, and therefore the international recognition of a degree that a student studying the same degree in Edinburgh. So I think the one key aspect then is really about kind of a recognised international benchmark of quality. This is a kind of a UK degree. It's also a Scottish degree, and in Scotland, we have a particular focus not just on quality assurance but also quality enhancement, which means that kind of we are continually looking to evolve the way in which we teach and the way in which students learn. So you're not only getting that kind of UK benchmark, but also that particularly kind of Scottish, that sort of recognised Scottish approach to education, which really goes back a long way, rooted in the Scottish Enlightenment. So for a student, what you're then getting is not only that, you're getting a qualification that if your student wants to kind of work in Nepal or wants to work outside Nepal, it's recognised. The kind of the quality of it is recognised. It's assured. As equivalent, as having the same standing as a degree in the UK.
Right.
And that itself is a kind of internationally recognised standard. So I think that's one important component. And as we've sort of reflected on already, the second dimension is just you are in culinary arts and in hospitality, you are in international. These are international businesses. And so what a kind of, this sort of collaboration means is you can kind of combine the best of, the kind of the huge respect and promotion of Nepali culture that Silver Mountain has, Nepali culture, Nepali kind of, sort of culinary arts as well, and combine that with a kind of distinctly kind of UK and Scottish sort of higher education. So you're getting a degree that's not only benchmarked in terms of its standard, but also is genuinely international in terms of bringing together two different higher education systems, two different cultures, two different histories, in a way that kind of respects both those contexts rather than one superseding the other.
Right.
And that, you're not going to get that. I mean, there will be some fantastic kind of sort of, degrees offered by the kind of the state universities in Nepal, but they will not be able to offer just because they're not kind of, sort of these sort of international collaborations, that particular international dimension.
Right, very rightly so, Professor. So obviously QMU and its degree and the UK degree is recognized internationally in current times as well. But I can't help but think about the history 150 years ago as QMU started as a culinary school as well. So would you say that history would also add on to signal hospitality professionals now, maybe international chains such as Marriott or maybe Four Seasons or other properties as well, that have their own history, such as the Claridge's in London. Would you say a Queen Margaret degree would signal something to them as well as employers?
Yes, I think so. There's a couple of things. I mean, firstly, as you say, that our establishment was grounded in hospitality or specifically at that point in food. And with a particular, it was really established in 1875 to do two things. One was to provide educational opportunities to women, post-school educational opportunities to women, because there were very few, and women who couldn't get into many of the kind of university, the university just weren't open to women at that particular point, or only onto a very sort of select few programs and in very small numbers. So it was partly established to offer those sorts of opportunities to women. So there's always been that strong social justice element, and that continues to run through what we do in terms of transnational education. It's partly about, you might have students who would like a UK degree but can't afford to go and study for 4 years in the UK. It's expensive. The tuition fee is expensive. The cost of living is kind of comparatively expensive. So this sort of transnational educational partnership is one way of enabling a student to get a UK degree. So it's a kind of, there is that social justice element continues, but critically that focus on food, on nutrition, on diet, and more broadly, obviously we introduced our own sort of hospitality programs, and we now also train teachers in what in the UK is known as sort of domestic science or home economics. So we train secondary school teachers who will go and teach students in schools about food and about kind of cooking. So there's a nice sort of virtuous sort of circle to that. But it does mean that, yes, as you say, for the hotel chains, they will recognise that we have a long history here, and we've played at particular points in our history quite key roles. And we'll have graduates who've gone on to very sort of prominent positions in these chains across the globe. Right.
So definitely, Professor. I'd like to explore a little bit about, let's put this next question as a fun fact time. So the international world, the global world knows so much about QMU, and as we just explored right now, the brands also know so much about them, and there's so much of value. But I'm sure there are certain fun facts that probably maybe even your own students at QMU do not know, and maybe would find surprising. If you may, please kindly share.
Well, I think
something.
Yeah, well, I think what many people do know is that perhaps unusually for a university, it was established by two women. Many of the older universities are established by the church or kind of sort of, sort of monasteries. So it's established by two women. That bit is often known. What's sort of less known is that they were supported by Queen Victoria's granddaughter, her fourth granddaughter, the Duchess of Argyll, who then continued to be a patron for the university.
Right.
So we have a kind of a royal connection. It was only later we became Queen Margaret University. I suppose the fun fact about Queen Margaret, she was English. She kind of fled religious persecution twice from England. So she studied so she was an international student herself, because she ended up studying in the court in Hungary. And that's partly why she's sort of patron saint of Hungary. And she came back to England and then fled religious persecution again. And this is more like a Hollywood film. She was sort of, she wasn't heading for Scotland, but a storm blew the ship off course, and they ended up in Scotland, and somehow, bit of a romantic comedy, she meets King Malcolm Canmore of Scotland and marries him. And she was known for the care, not only for her intellect, but the care she took of the poor in the area, often feeding them before she fed herself. So that was one of the reasons we adopted her as the sort of the patron saint in terms of the name of the university. So that's where the kind of Queen Margaret comes from.
So such a fun fact. Wow. So I'm sure most of our viewers who are enrolled right now is going to find it very surprising, and probably maybe students out at Edinburgh too, maybe most of them might have not heard about this fact. Professor, I'd like to now move on to a little bit of more detail relative to Nepal, since we would, really like to explore and give our viewers as much information as we can. Nepal being the beautiful country that it is, Professor, tourism and hospitality is kind of the one bone of the backbone, if not the only bone. And Nepal really depends on it. And we have a lot of aspiring hospitality professionals as well, and students, a lot of students right off high school, they want to explore hospitality as well. So for those people who want to explore this academically first and get a degree, and then get an experience and maybe come back and work for Nepal as well, one question that they generally might have is the curriculum developed in a way that is going to prepare me to work both internationally and here in Nepal as well? So coming to my question, Professor, I'd like you to explore a little bit on the context of how the curriculum is developed and what kind of outcomes should student maybe probably expect.
Yes, well, it's a very good question, and I suppose one of the things Scotland and Edinburgh have in common, well, Scotland has in common with Nepal, and Edinburgh has in common with Kathmandu, is just how important hospitality and tourism are to those economies as well. It is one of the kind of key sectors for Scotland. Edinburgh is a huge sort of tourist destination. There's probably, I don't know, maybe kind of 1.5 weeks of the year when it's not full of tourists, or when there's not a festival on. And I know you like your festivals here too. So there's a commonality in terms of just how critical to the sort of national economy and the local economy sort of hospitality and tourism are. So we share that. I was lucky enough. I mean, I was here in 2011. It was my first time I'd come anywhere kind of east of Berlin, was to come here and chair the validation event for the first validation event for the hospitality and tourism management degree. So I've had an involvement with the program and with the partnership here, sort of right from the very start, which means I sort of know it reasonably well. What we are known for, and what we recognised in Silver Mountain, and what attracted us to working with Silver Mountain, and one of the things we sort of we recognised in the degree that was developed was precisely that it prepares students for working. We have very strong, at the university in Edinburgh, we have very strong referred to as kind of graduate employment rates. So, kind of consistently, we're one of the top in Scotland in terms of the percentage of our students who are in employment within sort of 6 months of graduation. And we, like Silver Mountain, specifically prepare our students for the world of work. So I would say one of the things we were looking at in looking at the degree here and looking at the staff and the kind of experience the degree was going to offer the students was the extent to which it combined both kind of academic, theoretical knowledge, kind of, communication skills, research skills, all those sorts of things, that kind of rigor and discipline with hands-on professional training.
Right.
What employers in Edinburgh say they like about our students is the fact that they combine the two. Often you'll have a university that might have a particular strength in one, might be very sort of academic in the traditional sense,
Right.
but a more traditional university, a more research intensive university might spend less time in terms of the kind of, the sort of hands-on, sort of work, because we are grounded, as we were saying earlier, in terms of the kind of, the Edinburgh School of Cookery. We come from that very kind of,
Right.
sort of hands-on, sort of, professionally orientated tradition, and we've kind of kept true to that. So I think for the degree here, it has that perfect combination of academic rigor with kind of hands-on professional training, and crucially, as part of that, and again, this is something we were looking for in the degree program that was being developed, is that kind of practical experience outside of the college. Whether it's sort of an internship or a placement, that too is kind of critical in developing students' confidence, but also their connections, their networks, their opportunities to apply what they've learned in the classroom and what they've learned in the kind of in the kitchens and so on here, in a kind of real world setting. So I think that for me means that your graduates are kind of, perfectly formed and ready to go into their chosen profession, be it into kind of culinary arts or hospitality or hotel management, because they've got that internationally recognized degree, but a degree that combines those two things. But I'd say there's a third thing. We have one of sort of the mottos for Queen Margaret is acting with head, heart and hand. And I suppose I've spoken about the head bit in terms of kind of academic rigor, the hand bit in terms of that technical kind of, sort of practical skills. But the heart bit for me is what I love about kind of culinary arts and hospitality, and is also what's central to really progressing in this field. And that's the kind of care that you take of your customer, whether they're in a hotel or in a kind of a restaurant, or you've kind of, set up your own sort of business. That's the heart element. And what I think an absolute strength of Silver Mountain is its heart. And I see that in the relationship between the kind of the students and the staff, the care, and it's about care. It's about the kind of the care you take of the students reflects the kind of care we expect kind of graduates to be taking when they're working in these fields of work. So I think that there is, yes, that combination of head and hand in terms of kind of academic and sort of technical professional skills, but crucially, and I think this absolutely sort of separates Silver Mountain out from many others, it's the care you take of your students, of the program, and the care they then sort of take when they go out into the world.
Right. Such wonderfully structured when you say head, heart and hand, and definitely it is. But many families here in Nepal would probably not see hospitality through our eyes, probably. And it's sad to say that people also sometimes just confuse hospitality to an industry that is just here to serve people, and they do not have the bigger picture. Maybe interested young professionals or aspiring professionals do their research, and then they know about their career prospects as well. However, it's sometimes tough for younger people to convince their parents, probably, or the guardians, or whoever is trying to look after them, or their sponsorship as well. So what would you say to those people who are confused about maybe hospitality as to being just serving people, or who just have a limited view of the industry?
Yes, I think one way a sort of analogy to use, and I would say this partly because it could, with a background in film, is it would be a bit like confusing filmmaking with, well, that's just what the stars do. It's just all about the acting. Whereas if you stay for the credits at the end, you'll know that the actors make up a sort of a tiny proportion, and that there's a huge long list of kind of, minutes go by as the kind of credits roll. in this huge variety of kind of craft and skills and and jobs, and hospitality can be a bit like that. That what people tend to see is they'll see the kind of the people behind the bar, they'll see the kind of the waiters or waitresses, or they'll see the people at the hotel reception. Mm-hmm. That is clearly an essential part, that kind of sort of front of house work, but that's like the actors on the screen. That's kind of scratching the surface of the profession. It's a profession, it's a profession in many ways like any other, but also unlike any other. But it's like any other in as much as you need human resource managers, you need your kind of finance people, you need all the kind of business skills you'd expect in any other profession. So I suppose one thing to say is, well, many of the skills you gain on these sorts of programs are transferable to other industries, mm-hmm. because actually it's not just about, bar work and kind of sort of waitressing, front of house. These are all important. That's that kind of that kind of contact with the customer. But these are careers that these are degrees that lead to careers across the globe. They literally take people across the globe. They take people into kind of realms of sort of management, and you then find students then sort of specialize. The great thing about the degree is you'll encounter the range. You'll sort of cycle around the different positions in a hotel, and you'll discover, yes, it's not just about reception and housekeeping. There's all the kind of, there's the human resource management. There's all the kind of, there's the running of a kind of a complicated sort of, never stopping business. It's a sort of 24-hour, 365 days of a year business. One of the most creative sort of industries there is, I think, kind of, culinary arts and hospitality. But also one of the demanding. So it really hones leadership skills in a way that perhaps is less true in other industries. Yeah. So I would say it's don't confuse don't confuse sort of hospitality and culinary arts with sort of what you might see on the television, or what you encounter in terms of that sort of that immediate contact. Right. And it's true. As I said, I kind of I did bar work when I was going through university. That's often it's not brilliantly paid, but it was great fun, and it sort of developed that kind of that customer care. It developed my own confidence. But that doesn't sort of touch the sides of kind of you've got to look after because you had kitchens, you had chefs, you had all the kind of food prep. You've got people looking after the kegs, people selecting the kind of the wines and the beer, designing the menus. You've then got once you move into kind of larger companies, as I say, you've got lots of all the other kind of jobs you would expect in any other industry are there in the hospitality industry as well.
Right. Very wonderfully constructed. Yes, I was coming to the point because most people just think about kitchens and restaurants when they think about hospitality, or just maybe at hotels, and leave out maybe the airlines or the cruise lines industry as well. Many of our students here are nowadays aspiring to become probably a good sales manager in the hospitality, and probably through their finance courses they want to become a good revenue manager as well. They might want to become laundry managers or executives, and obviously with all that knowledge they want to become a GM someday, and maybe start their own entrepreneurship as well. But having them explore in so many areas, we generally sometimes receive queries regarding the changes in the technological world nowadays, Professor. Obviously, there are a lot of technical skills that a hospitality worker would need, and as you rightfully said at the very start, beginning from maybe confidence and how to handle pressure and diversity and all of that. But there is a lot of back of the house things that we go through as well. And I often find my students asking me about the challenges that the AI world is going to present to the hospitality world as well. And many of them wonder whether creative thinking, or maybe probably designing some packages, or maybe coming up with good events, or maybe just writing a simple email would someday be overtaken by an AI robot, or just a simple computer. So I find my students sometimes worried and sometimes scared as well. How would you have consulted them, or what is your view regarding this?
I think we have a responsibility as higher education institutions to train students and develop student skills so that when they go out into the world of work, they can use AI, because that will become an increasing expectation. It will become part of sort of any sector. I mean, it will affect different sectors differently, but AI will absolutely be there. We can't, shut it back in the box and sort of, hope it goes away. However, I think the sort of, there often is a bit of kind of, sort of scaremongering in terms of AI will kind of replace jobs. I think it'll augment jobs, and I think what we have to train our students to do is to work with AI rather than sort of kind of against it. So I don't tend to think of it as AI kind of replacing jobs. It's more it will slightly modify those jobs that people will have access to a generative AI that they can. But you need to know, well, what are the questions I want to ask? What are because you always still need to sort of prompt it. And then you need to kind of review the output of that prompt, and you can't do that if you're not already kind of quite highly skilled yourself. So I think we need to sort of train our students to be able to work alongside AI, to be able to, yes. So if you're writing emails, it can give you options. If you're sort of designing menus, it can kind of, come up with things that you might not have thought of. But you should think of it as a kind of, sort of helpful, kind of, sort of intern, if you like, sort of on the side, but whose work you need to check all the time.
Right.
But yes, it will allow you to, to ask questions of spreadsheets without having to be such an expert in Excel pivot tables. You'll just be able to use the sort of chat function and say, well, what are the trends, identify some trends here in terms of, this particular kind of customer segment. Right. It'll make that sort of thing easier, but it won't make the role go away. It just means there are particular aspects of the role that you will effectively not so much offload to the AI, but kind of, ask for its assistance in.
But after all, it's just an output device, if we could put it correctly, maybe, because as you pointed out, the output always depends on what quality of input anybody's putting in. And then, of course, you have to have the human judgment as well on whether things are here or not. So, coming to Professor's answer on this one, I'd pretty much surely say, students, you do not have to worry much about AI taking over hospitality work as well. However, they might have another query regarding how is QMU supporting learning with AI and maybe incorporating it into its curriculum, and how are we dealing with it at QMU?
Yes. I think there are two aspects to that. There's the specific question, which was a concern for the higher education sector kind of globally when generative AI became sort of publicly affordable and available with ChatGPT.
Right.
And that was over protecting the integrity of assessments. So there is sort of specific work around sort of, what we do there. But we and much of the sector again came to the conclusion very early on that because we needed to prepare students for being able to use generative AI in the world of work, that we need to, yes, it caused us to sort of rethink some of the format of our assessment, but some of that includes thinking about, well, how can we encourage students to how can we develop students' understanding of how to use AI critically? So rather than saying, well, you're not allowed to use AI, now there'll be some assignments where it's simply not practical to use AI, but in others it's kind of perfectly practical, but then that sort of changes the nature of the assessment of it. But there was specific pieces of work around protecting the integrity of assessment, because that was a kind of an initial concern. But the broader kind of thing that we have done is to students, because our students have access to Microsoft Office, that includes access to Microsoft Copilot.
Right.
I think Copilot, in a way, kind of is. I quite like the fact that Microsoft have called it Copilot, because it goes back to my answer to your previous question. It is that idea of someone who sits alongside you. You wouldn't trust them to fly the plane on their own.
Right.
So one way we prepare students is to make that available to them. We say, look, this is safe. The data stays within the institution. It doesn't. So we encourage our students to use that rather than other generative AIs, because we know what happens to the data. And it's still grounded in the kind of the most powerful models. But what I would say is that we are having to continue, because the technology is developing so rapidly. it's only right that higher education institutions themselves develop their guidance and their policies and their work with students around AI as well. That's because it that also can't stand still. And it's partly because I think many students will also be concerned about the environmental impact of these kind of large language models, in terms of the servers that they use. And so part of what we need to do is to kind of help students both understand that impact, but also to understand how you can kind of minimize that impact in terms of what you ask it to do and the way you ask it to do things, and to kind of calibrate just how much is, I don't know, kind of an AI prompt. A general AI prompt is probably something that takes up the same amount of energy as something like 10 Google searches. But you could argue with an AI prompt, that saves you about 10 Google searches. So it's not that there is no, you absolutely need to take seriously the environmental impact, but again, it's our responsibility is to sort of train students to understand that and to think about, well, are there ways in which you can kind of minimize that? So I think that, we need to start, if we're not already, kind of building the use of AI, not just into our assessment and safeguarding our assessment against kind of, sort of unacknowledged or unattributed use of generative AI, but more generally into the learning, it's because it's there, it's on your phone. I mean, in many ways, it's always been there. It's, it's the autocorrect when you're writing a text. It's, that's
or even
AI.
emails someday.
Yes.
Would have seemed like an AI or computer someday. Yes.
So in a way, it's been there. But what changed, obviously, with ChatGPT was that kind of chat-based prompt interface and the wide kind of global availability of that.
Right.
So I think it's our responsibility as educational institutions to support students' ability to use this technology, but to use it safely, fairly, responsibly, kind of ethically, and to mitigate against the sort of kind of environmental damages as much as they can.
Right. Speaking about technology and all the future changes and future possibilities, I can't help but keep myself from asking you about the possibilities that you see here in Nepal. We are right now at a crossroad, be it politically or infrastructure-wise, or as a nation that's trying to get global recognition as well, and hospitality-wise as well, tourism-wise as well. So we are. Shall I say, not just one, but many crossroads. This is your fourth visit here, and we're very glad that you've found the time and the worth to visit us for the fourth time. And probably you'll be here. We wish you'll be here for next 5 or 6 times, or even maybe for longer times as well. How do you see the possibilities? You've been here in 2011. That was your first visit, and it's 2026 now. So more than a decade later, almost 15 years or so, you've probably seen changes. So what would you say would be possibilities for Nepal in the coming future?
Yes, I remember coming here not long after the earthquake, and Samir sort of took me to the top of the building and to really show me the and one of the things we could see with the number of international kind of chain hotels being built. So this was not, this was not what I expected to see. It's not the kind of the obvious thing you might expect to see after such a sort of devastating earthquake. You might in fact see you might expect to see the kind of the hotel industry, the hospitality industry kind of sort of really suffering. But instead, what you were seeing were these kind of sort of international kind of hotel chains, kind of building new hotels. So it's clearly, as you were saying, it's absolutely central to tourism and hospitality, to the country's economy. My impression is it continues to grow. There continues to be kind of sort of international investment in that. You have both natural resources and cultural resources, which will mean Nepal will always be a highly attractive sort of kind of sort of tourist destination. And I guess what that developing infrastructure was a kind of infrastructure to respond to the particularly the kind of sort of expectations of certain parts of the hospitality and tourism market. I mean, we all know in the kind of sort of 1960s, the so-called sort of hippie trail, etc., etc. But but what they were looking for was kind of something kind of, both sort of similar to, but different from the kind of thing that, the other sectors of the sort of hospitality and tourism marketing are looking for today. So I think because your attraction as a country, as a sort of tourist destination, is rooted in culture and heritage and geography. These are sort of, these are tangible things that other people can't replicate. They're sort of, they're distinct. Right. So I think there continues to be a very positive history for Nepal in terms of hospitality and tourism. I can only see it continuing to develop further. Sort of, more tourists kind of getting further off the beaten track. Visiting the other cities. But now clearly that comes with challenges in terms of sort of infrastructure and the kind of necessary investment in that infrastructure. But this is by no means a kind of flash in the pan phenomenon. I think kind of Nepal will continue to offer something very distinct and really sort of valued in terms of that. And I would say, I suppose the thing that an authenticity that's different from the other countries simply can't replicate. Yes, I mean, kind of the US, particularly if you look at kind of Florida, and Los Angeles. Yes, they've got their kind of theme parks, and they serve a particular purpose, and they're kind of for many people kind of sort of great fun, and you can kind of build your Disneylands around the world. You can't replicate what Nepal has to offer because it's rooted in the geography, the history, the culture, the kind of the cuisine. So and in a world where, as we were saying, kind of green screen, CGI, artificial intelligence, a sort of simulacra of kind of of entertainment. There's going to be more and more demand for that kind of authenticity that can't be generated on your iPhone using sort of some apps. That kind of experience of engaging with that firsthand, I think, is something that Nepal uniquely has to offer that kind of hospitality and tourism market.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on that one, Professor. So we've explored about your views in Nepal and your possibilities about the Nepalese tourism sector and hospitality as well. I'm glad that somebody as esteemed as you sees so much of potentiality in a country where mostly people, have been frustrated about possibilities as well. So this is probably a breath of fresh air for people, to realize about our own potentiality and be recognized globally as well. My next question, Professor, would be about what possibilities do you see in the continued relationship of Silver Mountain QMU? We've been here for 25 years. You've been in Edinburgh for 150, and together we've been running these degrees here for 15 years. So how do you see maybe the next 15 or the next 20 years from your side?
Yes, well, I mean, on the one hand, Silver Mountain might decide that it wants to sort of kind of expand its suite of programs, but I would imagine with us, which we would always support. I think at the same time, what makes Silver Mountain sort of distinct is that focus around kind of hospitality and culinary arts, and that particular strength, that particular place in the higher education landscape as a quality provider. Quality provider of a particular kind of sort of, degree education, and also quality provider of graduates who are ready to go and work sort of internationally and locally. And you would always want to keep that. That's going to be part of the DNA. So yes, you imagine the kind of portfolio of programs might expand while staying true to that, that mission really of sending out those sorts of graduates into the world. I think what both our histories demonstrate is that we are in this partnership for the long term, and we're here for the long term as well. I mean, I think you look at, and this is the interesting thing about sort of higher education. You look at other sectors, and there are many where companies do not last. There's a longevity to higher education institutions that's really quite remarkable, given that they're never rich institutions. They don't have sort of shareholders that they're kind of, that they're making wealthy, but they have a remarkable longevity. so I see a kind of a great, another 25, at least another 25 years. So, you'll be celebrating your 50th anniversary, just as hopefully, in due course we'll celebrate our 300th. So I see a kind of, a glorious future. It may well continue to sort of, to expand and develop, but I think it will do so while staying true to the sort of Silver Mountain vision, which is very much the kind of Queen Margaret vision too.
As you said earlier, the head, the heart, and the hand. And as long as we have the heart, and probably, yes, as you said, your 300th is not far away, and maybe our 50th, and maybe our 30th year together in Silver Mountain QMU. Professor, as we come to the end, due to our time constraints today, I'd like to thank you once again for all your time and for agreeing to do this in such a short notice. But I would lose an opportunity if I'd let you go without any rapid fire questions. So for this one, I'd have to keep my quiz about here. So it's a very simple 5 questions. I'd like to ask you a question and maybe, if possible, shoot out an answer right ahead. I'd like to start, since we are in the education field, so I'd like to start with one question. One book every hospitality student must read.
Okay, I would say Roger Martin's Playing to Win. It's a book about strategy, but it's a very clear approach to strategy. There's lots of books written on strategy that are highly theoretical. This is very applicable. He essentially says strategy is about making choices. It's a kind of integrated set of choices, and really it's the answer to five quite straightforward questions. The first of which is, what is our winning aspiration? Where are we going to play? How are we going to win? What capabilities do we need? And then what are the kind of management systems we need to underpin that? It's kind of that simple. So much of the book, because he worked at Procter & Gamble for many years, or worked with them, and clearly a very kind of successful company. But it does mean lots of the examples have nothing to do with hospitality and everything to do with kind of cosmetics and detergent, etc., etc.
Right.
But I would say, playing to win. If you want, and it works. It's a nice approach to strategy development that works whether you're a kind of, a small, sort of sole trader, sort of, you've started your own sort of startup in sort of, kind of food or hospitality, your own sort of, kind of restaurant or sort of, kind of bespoke kind of hotel, or you're a large conglomerate like Procter & Gamble. It's a nice kind of simple approach. So probably not a terribly sort of exciting book to recommend. I could recommend lots of films to do with food, but that's a different question which we won't go into. But yeah, Playing to Win by Roger Martin.
Thank you, Professor. My next question: the best meal you've ever had, and where?
Now, I had to confess to having it's a kind of French-style restaurant in Edinburgh, Café Saint-Honoré. It's actually run by a kind of Scottish chef, but it really combines the best of Scottish cuisine, Scottish, not so much Scottish cuisine, it's kind of sort of French cuisine, but using Scottish produce. So we have fantastic game in Scotland, sort of deer or kind of venison. We have fantastic fish and shellfish. There are cereal crops, etc. So it takes local produce. It's all where everything comes from, locally produced cheeses, etc., etc. But it's cooked with a kind of a sort of French flair in a quite a kind of sort of intimate setting. I've probably had my my best meals there.
Thank you very much, Chef. So Edinburgh or Kathmandu? Which has better street food?
Oh, Kathmandu.
Well, that was pretty easy.
There's no question. Where's my next Momo? That's what
I'm just fishing for compliments here. All right, my next question, Professor. One piece of advice for your 20-year-old self.
One piece of advice. I think it would be to not worry about the fact that you don't know what's going to happen next. And because nobody really knows what's going to happen next. we're all the kind of, authors of a story that we don't really know how it's going to turn out. So I think, and in a way, that's kind of reassuring, because you worry. I mean, I think people worry a lot about, have I made the right decision, or am I going to make the right decision, and kind of agonize over that, and it can be really sort of stressful. But actually, you can take some comfort from the fact that, well, nobody knows how that's going to turn out. You can't know how it's going to turn out, and you can only really find out how it's going to turn out by doing it.
Right.
So don't let the fear of doing that thing, the kind of concern as to how it's going to sort of stop you from doing it.
Right.
Take that opportunity, as I was saying earlier, and don't fret too much about how it's going to turn out, because nobody really knows. And that can be, in a way, that can be a comfort rather than a kind of scary proposition.
Right. I really like how you say that, we are authors of stories that we are writing ourselves, but then we don't know how it's going to end. Mostly people young, like 18 or 19, would probably think that they are the characters inside the story and somebody else is writing. But the way you put it definitely gives them the inspiration to probably grab the opportunities and write the stories themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have complete control, but we are nonetheless we are the ones, so the kind of the choices that come along may not have been ones that we didn't develop the choices, but the choice that we then make is, if you like, is ours, I guess, is one way of thinking about it. But I think it also, we see a lot of kind of anxiety, sort of like almost an epidemic of anxiety, and sort of, young people. Certainly that's been in the case in the UK. It's particularly a kind of, sort of post-pandemic phenomenon. I think kind of social media often doesn't help. But I think one reassurance is that, you've got, on the one hand, you've got lots of time. If you look back and you think, kind of look at what these people achieved sort of, kind of 30 years ago, and it's like, well, yes, but you have a lot more time than they have. Your life expectancy is that much longer. You can't say don't worry, but I think that for me, a kind of a key message is, well, look, worrying about how something is going to turn out is kind of unnecessary, because you can't know how it's going to turn out until you do it. So don't let the fear of how it might turn out sort of stop you from doing it, because you can then move on and do something else. And we learn more through failure in many ways than we do through success.
Right. Very rightfully said, Professor. My last question, I'd like to humbly request you to finish this sentence. The future of hospitality is?
Oh, Rosie. I mean, it's exciting. It's a creative. It's okay. This is a long sentence, isn't it? To finish your one sentence. I think the joy of hospitality, and I've sort of said this before, comes from, I think, this notion of kind of care. Care, whether it's kind of the care of preparing a meal, preparing an event, the care of the customer in the hotel. It's that human interaction and that joy you're bringing to someone else. Being able to have that impact on someone else is tremendous. And that's what draws a lot of people into hospitality and into culinary of arts. The fact that you're doing something that that has an impact on someone else that brings them joy, and that's partly because of the craft that you've acquired, that you've developed, but it's also because of the care you take in sort of exercising that. So no, I think it's got a brilliant future, and I strongly recommend it.
Well, thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. Once again, please accept our heartfelt gratitude and a lot of special thanks for coming over to Nepal. We are much excited for the graduation ceremony as well tomorrow, and we are very glad to have you over. We'll also be celebrating the 25th year the day after, so we look forward to celebrating that with you as well. And I'm very, very, very fortunate enough today to have had this opportunity to, make my viewers understand more about QMU, our partnership, and how we run things, and how we check and balance on the quality part as well, the degree and its value and the opportunities, and of course, the long-standing relationship between Queen Margaret University, Edinburgh, and Silver Mountain here in Kathmandu. So thank you so much, Professor.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you and to your audience. And it's always kind of wonderful being.
It's an honor to have you around. And as I said, this is your fourth, and we look forward to many, many, many more years together as well. Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much.
Thanks.